Hello. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I think with Alan, we can be sure of getting COE. He asked IBM for COE, and I want to announce that we can give the COE as long as Alan is there. But this is certificate of entertainment. Okay. So before I go into our panel, I'll introduce myself, and I'll request the panelists to introduce themselves, which would be the best in the context of the discussion. So I primarily focus on resources, manufacturing, and energy-related clients in the ASEAN region for services from IBM. And I also look at sustainability for the ASEAN region for IBM Consulting. So I will just request my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll just get going.
Thanks, Praveen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kent, and I'm from Jardine Cycle & Carriage. I'm currently the Regional CFO for Southeast Asia. So to Alan's question earlier, Jardine Cycle & Carriage is part of the Jardine Medicine Group from Hong Kong, a conglomerate, and we operate in about 7 or 8 main sectors, right? And my current primary focus is in automotive, and I look after the Southeast Asian portfolio. Thank you. Well, if there's a COE today, I will be happy to provide a car that comes with it, right?
Thanks, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill. I'm from IMDA, the e-invoice project office. I'm in charge of driving industry adoption of the nationwide e-invoicing initiative under the brand name of Invoice Now. I don't know how many of you have heard about Invoice Now. If you haven't heard of Invoice Now, then I fail my KPI.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for staying back. I'm the Asia CIO for Lendlease. Some of you may not know Lendlease, but you will know Jurong East Mall, 313 Somerset, Paya Lebar Quarter, Parkway Parade. So these are the malls under Lendlease, and I take care of Asia Pacific, 4 countries: Singapore, Malaysia, China, and Japan. Right, all the infrastructure and all the projects that are involved.
Thanks, David. So I think taking a leaf out of Alan's book in terms of looking at what CEOs are saying and what studies are saying. So we also have something called IBV, the Institute of Business Value in IBM, where we interview about 3,000 CEOs every year. It has been happening for about 15 years. So, but what is very interesting in this year, 2022, in the latest study, so when the CEOs were asked, what is your top challenge over the next 2 years, they ranked sustainability as the #1 challenge, which actually even over market factors, regulation, which were usually always the #1 in the previous years. So to that extent, maybe I want to start our question with sustainability to see what are your organizations doing specifically in the areas of sustainability, for yourself and maybe even for your ecosystem, right? So probably I'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Praveen. So I guess ESG, sustainability, these are all the hot topics, right, in recent years. And obviously, broadly speaking, we will have our soft targets, for 2030 and 2050 respectively, which I believe is quite consistent with what most governments and most companies are trying to achieve. But nonetheless, it is still a very nascent topic, right? And there would definitely be shortcuts to take, for instance, just buying carbon credits just to fulfill certain criteria, be able to issue reporting, right? But I think to me, what's more important is to do the right things at the right time, obviously, because the material impact that sustainability will cause to the business itself when it comes to products and services, and then I think most importantly, the operating environment. So one for us, which is very critical, the real estates. There's a lot to be done, but I think we are taking a very cautious approach to not overspend on things that we do not know enough just at the moment, right? So right balance is much needed. Otherwise, I think a lot of consultants out there will be willing to sell their advice. But then again, who do we go with? Who do we believe? And I think a lot of this, I would just say our approach is to take some guidance from the global scene, and then we will talk to as many people as possible. But then again, forming our own views is going to take a bit of time. I think in any case, the organization, we owe it to the stakeholders, to the shareholders, and to our own people, our employees, to do our best in keeping, I think holding that responsibility to everyone, to all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. So I would take that as getting to certain organization goals and looking at execution plans and going forward. And you are trying to understand what others are doing and what others are saying to get to that.
That's largely true. I think we got to focus on what is within our control, right? So the current assessments is really focused on scope 1 and scope 2 items. Beyond that, scope 3, I think I would just say it is a very challenging one for everyone, whether you're in the manufacturing space or whatnot. You can only control so much, and within your whole ecosystem, if like in my instance, there are manufacturers, brand owners, I can't control how they produce, right, and how they ship their products, for example. So I can only do what I can to try to contain some of this and prepare in advance. Yeah.
Thanks, Kent. And I'm sure many of you are facing the same challenges, because given scope 3 is likely to be 80 to 90% of the footprint, that's going to be the place where we really need to slice and dice and figure out how we really measure and in a auditable and practical manner. So that's very interesting. Thanks, Ken. And Bill, your work is all about digitizing and getting paper out of the way. So what is your take on how you bring sustainability to the?
I must admit that when we first started this initiative, the Invoice Now, sustainability is a byproduct. We didn't have sustainability from the onset as an objective. So many people ask us, why is IMDA driving e-invoicing? And we told them that based on our study, globally, there are 3 reasons why government is embarking on a nationwide e-invoicing initiative. The first is on tax. In some countries, tax is the main driver, and increasingly we are seeing more and more countries are using e-invoicing as a tool for tax purposes. For example, in Malaysia, in June this year, the Ministry of Finance actually announced that they are looking at using e-invoicing to improve the tax revenue. So that is the first driver. The second driver is public procurement. Public procurement, actually, this is where PEPL, the standards, originated from. It stands for Pan-European Public Procurement Online System. So Europe actually started public procurement using e-invoicing, and then that slowly flowed from B2G to B2B. And the third driver is actually digitalization, business efficiency. So when we look at the problem statement, it's really how to help our businesses to become more efficient through digital means. In Singapore, we don't have a tax problem, so we are not really looking at using e-invoicing for tax purposes, at least for now. And for public procurement, actually, if you are government suppliers, you must be very familiar with Vendors at Gov portal. To that, when we approach our Ministry of Finance, they say that we are already doing e-invoicing. Then we say, no, you are only helping yourself. The data that you receive is 100% E, but you are requesting all your suppliers to go to your portal to manually enter the information. It's not e-invoicing. So finally, they agreed, and we work with them to connect their system to the e-invoicing network as well. So when we started this initiative, we are really looking at how to help businesses to become more efficient. Just to give you a very simple example, if you receive an invoice today in PDF, most people call PDF as e-invoice. It is not. What do? They still need to pass this to their finance staff to actually manually enter this information. Then the manual, the human intervention, that actually takes a lot of time for people to do it. And if there are any errors, then actually you cost more. And that does not only affect you, it also affects your supplier and your customer. So by looking at this, and when we look at a study, we did a study on the economic benefits. Every manual invoice process costs about $8. If there's an error to fix it, it's about $72. So when we look at this at nationwide, it's actually about a multi-billion-dollar business. So actually, when we look at this problem statement, it's a no-brainer for us to get started. And very interestingly, this is where I will touch about sustainability. Our first large enterprise, which I will not name it, when we first approached the CFO, he's very interested. And he said that, I have this big problem. Every day, I'm actually shipping tons of invoices, paper invoices, to JB to process because it's cheaper. So actually, this business is receiving tons of papers, maybe it's exaggeration, but actually the full truck of invoices to ship to JB. And when we ask who is your biggest biller, Singtel. Okay, we went to Singtel. How many invoices do you process? They give us the figure. We did a rough calculation. If we stack the paper invoices that Singtel send out to their customers, it is as tall as Marina Bay Sands. So that's how much paper that they use. So I think although it's a byproduct, but it actually has become a very important consideration. Then a lot of businesses are asking, actually, IRAS requires us to do paper invoicing, right? need to keep. You say no. At the very beginning of this initiative, we have really sync up with IRAS. There's no need for you to actually keep your paper invoices. So that is actually the mystery that we do want to clarify with everyone. So I think I will stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think just taking the analogy you talked about, e-invoice versus a PDF being called. So again, I think even in sustainability, there are many things which get labeled as sustainability. So I think the key is to make things genuine. In fact, one of the things that I'm pretty vocal about is companies which buy out, say, wind farms or solar farms to turn green. Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at a global level and you're trying to change the needle, it's the same, right? It's just a financial change of hands. So unless you're creating something more, just buying maybe something that someone has created doesn't really make the difference. Maybe as a company, it looks better. So I think we've heard quite a lot on sustainability. So David, if you don't mind, I'll switch topic a bit. So through the day, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, especially who have been in the CIO room, they would have heard all kinds of the technology buzzwords, ranging from AI, machine learning, 5G, metaverse. I don't know what else came up. I missed a few sessions. So when it comes for someone like you play a finance role and a technology role. So what comes first? Is it like, do you decide on, here is this technology seems to be, really interesting. Let me see what I can do with this. Or do you see, what should I do and then look at the technology? So how does your decision making come in your organization?
Okay, there's a lot of great technology out there, right? And at the risk of being branded personnel non grata, right? I want to say that when we go into a business solution, we always start with the business, not the technology first, right? You look at the business and you ask them. Sometimes our users come to me and say, hey, what does the latest analytics do for me? What can they do for me? And my question is always, what do you want to get done? Right, so we say we always have to start from the business. So in a solution platform, we always say it is process, platform, then the people. Right, so you start with the business process and you say, what is your problem statement? What do you want to get fixed? Or what is your wish list, right? Alan shared about the process improvement, right? So it's what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? Or what are you trying to do better than what you're doing right now? Yeah, so we start with a business objective, and whenever possible, we always go into what we call a problem statement, right? You need to start with a problem statement so that at the end of your investment, you can say that the problem has been solved, and that is also where you work out your ROI, right? The problem you have right now, like you say, how much is it costing you, shuffling paper, logistic costs, and all those kind of stuff, right? So that's your problem statement. So you start with your problem statement, start with the business requirement first, right? Then you go find a technology to solve, right? So technology should be a mean to an end and not an end to itself, right? So we always say, if you start with the technology, then you are a solution looking for a problem. Right, but what we want to do is want to be a solution to a problem, right? So in terms of deciding on a technology, you always start with the business problem first, then you work your way outwards.
Thanks, David, for that clarity. And so maybe I'll just segue a bit from that. When we talk about all this AI, machine learning, and robotic process automation, now a lot of discussion is about whatever you can automate, let's automate, right? So at what stage do you think we'll draw a line between, replacing humans by AI, and should it be done at all?
Well, I think for me, firstly, I would just say that I don't believe that AI or machines or robots will completely replace humans, right? The human intellectual is definitely very important, but obviously in certain functions like take finance, for sure there are processes that can be fully automated. Like RPA is already very widely being used. But when it comes to the business, and again, taking my current trade, the car trade, car sales, for example, it will be a while before cars will be 100% sold online, right? And I think what we believe is that, in a car buying journey, the human touch is very important because emotions are involved. So it will be quite impossible for I think maybe Tesla has proven that model wrong or right, I'm not sure, but I think globally, I think what we are all seeing is that consumers still like the touch and feel of a vehicle before you spend hundreds of thousands, especially in an environment like Singapore, right? So I think that transition will happen, but it will take time. And I think the reality is we will have to progress on, but I think it's important to I think I will echo what David just said, right? You cannot over-automate, cannot over-digitalize unless you have a real problem statement to solve for. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Ken. And maybe, Bill, if I could put the combination of the two questions over to you, what would be your take on that?
Firstly, I fully agree that we should start with a problem statement rather than looking at the technology. There's so many buzzwords there, AI, machine learning, the latest metaverse. I mean, those are good trends, but you really need to look at what kind of problems they are solving. And I think the human touch is also quite important. So when we started our initiative, actually there are many fancy words there and fancy standards, technology there. But we started as a very practical approach. Firstly, Singapore is too small, a country that we develop our own standards. We want to see what other countries are doing. And so we landed on PEPL, which is a European standards. And it is so good, too good to be true, that we started to suspect, is it a scam or something? We actually flew all the way to Norway to meet their SecGen, and they did all the presentations to us. At the end of the 2 days, they gave us 3 options. They say, Singapore, welcome to PEPL, Open PEPL for the meetings. I give you 3 options. First is to carry on, be inspired by us, and carry on your life. Option 2, the technology is free. Feel free to use it. And there's this open source. Just use it. Option 3, join us. So on our flight back, actually we decided that we want to join them. And then Singapore became the first PEPL authority outside of Europe. After that, Australia and New Zealand joined. Japan has joined. And we are in close conversation with Malaysia. So Australia, the case for Australia is very interesting. They copied the whole open source code a few years even before we joined, and they want to work on it. They got the best experts to work on the technology, but there's one missing link, which is the governance structure. So after we have joined, they came to ask us, what is Singapore government's consideration for joining PEPL? For us, it is very cheap. It's free. There's no roaming fees between the 2 parties. Why not? So in the end, they have decided to join, and today they're pushing very hard on the adoption. So my point is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are many existing technologies there. And actually the key challenge is not about finding the best technology, the most sexy technology. It is about how you diffuse the technology to people. So I think most of you have heard of PayNow, and there are PayNow corporates, and there are PayNow consumer. So for Invoice Now, we want to do the same thing. The underlying technology is very simple. It's a web service. It's a UBL. It's not AI. It's not fanciful technologies. But we want to make sure that every businesses in Singapore have it, similar to PayNow. And today we're at about 20% penetration rate. We have about 50,000 businesses already connected. And look at the overall population of 200,000 businesses. I think there's a long way for us to go. So we will keep pushing for adoption. And it is not just about adoption. So the analogy is that I think earlier we give some grants to encourage businesses to connect. It's about downloading the mobile applications. But in order for your mobile app to be really useful, you need people to use it. So I think now our focus is really on transaction. And for that, the government is taking the lead. So we have really made the Vendors at Gov portal connected to the network, and we have made it very clear that it is the preferred model, preferred channel for all government suppliers to send invoices to us. But you and I know that preferred means nothing. So we are willing to play the catalyst role, and we are working very closely with Ministry of Finance to work on a plan to actually mandate to make all our government suppliers to on this platform. And we are also learning from Norway. Norway started with B2G mandate, and today the whole adoption rate is 60-70%. And the government transaction now only account for about 5% of the overall B2B transaction. So this is something that we are working on. I don't have the full details and I also don't have the timeline, but that shows that we are very committed to make sure that the whole country, the industry, adopt Invoice Now. So it's really about technology diffusion, not so much about looking for the most sexy technology.
Thank.
Even if you don't mind, I think
Yeah,
just
sure.
wanted to tap on that comment as well. I think Singapore clearly is a very good role model, for the region, for the other countries to follow and learn from. But I think the clear distinction here is that Singapore can afford to do so because of the reserves that they have. But take a country like Indonesia, like Vietnam, they don't have the sort of capabilities to begin with. And then I think if you talk about the local businesses, a lot of them will struggle, and they would probably have limited capital to be allocated to spend in this field. So I think what they end up doing is very targeted investments, right? It's often not about looking for the best solution, but rather what is the purpose of what they want, and then whether is that going to solve the problem for them, or is it going to just, for them to check the box in terms of digitalization. I think that is the conversation that I often have with my business units across the region. It's not about how much you spend, but it's whether you are optimizing the spend. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for those insights, Bill and Ken. I think one takeaway from this is, how somebody gets started on something and others are able to leverage on that, right? So, and in fact, we are also seeing those examples where what we term it as co-opetition, and what that means is actually competition, coming together and cooperating. So competition, cooperation as co-opetition. So we are seeing more and more trends where technology platforms are becoming more of platforms rather than solution for somebody. So we've seen recently a lot of companies in the plastic value chain, both in the petrochemical value chain and the users, such as a Pepsi, Henkel and all. So they got together, for example, to form something called Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And they are looking at solving the plastic waste challenge together as a corporation. So there are, as you say, small and large companies who just onboard and come in. And similarly, we've seen that when it comes to traceability, when it comes to supply chain, container tracking, where it's actually the industry getting together to solve the problem rather than someone trying to just solve it for themselves. But as we go into some of these complex solutions and with this kind of digital transformation, I think there's always a challenge on skills. In fact, like as IBM, even today, especially with COVID, right, we've seen a lot of demand for skills in some countries, especially in the low-cost countries, and hence people shifting jobs and so on. So, Kent, maybe I'll start with you. Where do you see a shortage of skills, especially in your kind of industry? And so what do you do about managing that part of the situation?
Sure. Well, I can't speak for the other industries, but take automotive, which is what I'm closest to. So we are in the transition into electrification and automation, right, in a big way. And I think a lot of this, while the technology is ready, I think the consumer's adoption may not be, right? Nonetheless, I still believe that that these changes will take place, will happen very quickly, and it's almost coming from a product push perspective, meaning in Singapore, in about 10, 15 years from now, you will only see electric cars being sold, which is part of the government's initiative, right? They are them forcing adoption and I think adoption of sustainability overall. So in terms of skill sets, I think with that shift, you are taking away something that has taken decades, if not centuries, to be developed. The petrol and fuel-driven cars, and now everything battery dependent. So mechanically, it's going to be quite challenging. So in terms of the shortage of skills, I would say, a lot of our technicians, for instance, and even people working in the factories, in the manufacturing plants, will need to adapt, and I think that is where we believe we will be spending a considerable amount of investments and effort in trying to prepare them for the future. I think the products will change, the demands will change, so it's a matter of us preparing ourselves for that to happen. Yeah, and nonetheless, I think if we talk about, if we speak to certain consultants, they will still believe that EVs will not dominate the globe, not just yet. It's going to take another maybe 20, 30 years. Some will say 10 years, right? So there will still be cars that are petrol run, diesel run on the roads, and there will still be a need for these cars to be maintained in the future. So it's a matter of, again, maintaining that balance. That's how I see it. Thanks.
Totally understand, because while the rate of growth is high, there is such a huge population of existing vehicles, which will take some time to overtake. So maybe, David, I'll jump to you, because as new skill requirements come, you don't want to keep adding people anyway in the organization, right? So how do you get to upskilling and cross-skilling, and how do you deal with that part of the equation in keeping up with the skill shortage?
I think one of the reality is that in today's context, right, there's never a case where you work, you go for training, then you come back with new skills, then you do. It is what we described, right? You are running a race now, and you're expected to change your shoe without stopping, right? And some say you're supposed to change your T-shirt and your shorts without stopping, because that's the journey of life as we know it right now, right? So the question is, how do you then do your training, right? And we always say that there are three aspects to training. One is the operational part, which is the day-to-day, product change, software get updates, and all that. So how do you get your people trained to do that day-to-day, right? Then there's the tactical part where you prepare for upgrades, maybe on an annual basis or short-term basis, right? And then finally, you have the more strategic part where, for example, if you're going to do a lift and shift from a on-prem to a cloud provider, right? On one hand, the concept is what we call same, but yet they are different, right? On-prem is just servers. Go onto the cloud, it's still servers, but it's a very different way of using it, provisioning, and all this kind of stuff, right? So it will be actually now more of the working level telling you what are the skills they need and then planning for them to go for training, right? But for myself, I find that two of the biggest challenge of training, number one is cost, right? We all talk about ROI. Training cost is an ROI that don't come easily, difficult to quantify, and it takes time to realize the ROI, right? The second thing about ROI is not just your financial outlay, but it's also the time for your people to go for training, right? Because they have their day job to do, and you're saying that, oh, you're going to take 2 hours every day out to go and do your online training or whatever training you have, right? So these all represent investment on the organization part. And it's going to be painful for a while because you're letting people go 1-3 times a week, 4 hours to go for their training. Even if they go hide themselves or you put themselves into a meeting room to do their own online training, right? There's still a consideration because there's still the day job to do. So those are the challenges that we plan and hope to work around.
Thanks for that. So again, Bill, even when you are engaging on this kind of a new journey, right? So it's probably not the same set of people who were doing their earlier jobs who can manage to do this, because A is in terms of technology, in terms of support, in terms of how to deal with multi-country kind of equation. So how are you dealing with the skills equation here?
I think I must share some first-hand experience. When we were trying to hire people into our team, we realized how hard it is today to hire people with the good technical skills. There are people who actually just before the interview say that, oh, I really got a job offer, I'm not coming. And there are people who received the offer but decided not to come in. So the IT field is very hot. And I think then they actually create a bipolar. You have the IT field of people who are in hot demand, and for the rest of the sectors, actually people are very afraid that their job will be replaced by AI, machine learning. So I think the challenge is real. And but the good news is that I think David talked about cost, talk about ROI. I think government is quite committed. IMD, we have a TESA program, and I think even for e-invoicing itself, we are working with Skills Future to make sure that there are affordable courses available. But I think the most important thing is that the leaders must trust that your staff, they need the skill set, and they're willing to learn, send them for the training. And from the staff perspective is that you must be willing to learn, not because your boss sent you to it. So I think the attitude is most important. And we're on government side, from our perspective, we'll make sure that we will bring the cost as low as possible.
Thanks for that, Bill. Actually, from our own organization perspective, of course, we are in different industries. So we have this concept called Think 40. So where literally anybody who's working in our organization is expected to complete a minimum 40 hours of learning. I wouldn't call it training, but it's learning, which is other than mandatory things like your business conduct and other things, right? So this is something which we encourage as a hygiene factor, and that's yielded us pretty good results as such. Now, I just want to check if there's any questions on Slido, otherwise I'll just go to the closing remarks. Okay, I didn't expect this. The screen is full. Okay, maybe I'd first take the question of Mr. Anonymous, which is whether we can have an effective ESG without IT. Interesting question. Any of you want to take it? Actually, I don't mind taking it myself. So, yeah. So, actually speaking, see, the whole concept of ESG, IT is an enabler to it. So, so definitely you can have your ESG. You can do really good work. You don't necessarily need to display it and create dashboards for everyone to see. So you can have it, but the key in this is actually getting your organization goals very clear, which could be as ambitious as saying when do you want to be net zero, or it could be as simple as saying I want to know what are my emissions today, right? So you need to be practical in your approach, and then for each of these goals you need to see what is the underlying data that you need, the ESG data that you need. But more importantly, as many of our panelists mentioned, it's after you get this data, you need to embed this as part of your organization. Which means, if you're doing a sourcing, are you actually also considering the carbon footprint as one of your factors for selection? So, is it just lead time and price, or today are you willing to take that one? Or when you're doing a predictive maintenance, when you're doing maintenance for your machines, are you only looking at what will make my machine run longer without a repair, or are you looking at also whether if it's emitting a methane or a carbon dioxide that is getting reduced? So until you embed these into your way of working, you will not be able to do it effectively. So net to net, your goals and your actions, they don't need IT, but at the end of it, to do the underlying data and basic measurement, you require some base level of technology, nothing complex out there, right? So I think there's an interesting question on, there are so many, yeah.
Can I take a question on how do you bring digitalization to multi-generation thing?
I was about to ask you that question.
Yeah. Thank you. Because I think we shouldn't approach and see it as a multi-generation thing to say we have the Gen X, Y, Z and all this kind of thing, right? But we have to look at it as different stakeholder with different objective, right? Even within Lendlease itself, we have the keyboard warriors who sit in the office, right? We got construction hard hat worker with their bulging muscles, everything that works on the work site. And then we got the people in between, right? How do you bring digitalization to the people out there where all they know is construction, piling, and all this kind of thing, right? It's easy to talk to the keyboard warrior about digitization, but not the other end of the spectrum, right? So it's not just the young and the old, but within the same company, right, different. The financing digitalization differently from the P&C people. They are very people-focused, right? Finance is very number-focused. So I think you have to start on the basis that no two stakeholders are the same. And you can never find a one-size-fits-all solution, right? You just have to have this, there's a new word called true north, right? So you need to know what are you aiming for, and then recognizing that there's a bunch of people across the entire organization that you have to try and bring them along, right? And they all go by different pace, right? The digital people, native, we call them keyboard warrior, will definitely move very fast. But then there's also a bunch of people who you need them to move, but then they will not move at the same rate as the other. Right, so it's to have a very honest view of your organization and say who are the different stakeholders, what are their objectives, and what is their literacy in terms of digitization, and then just plan accordingly. Yeah.
Thanks, David. I think many interesting questions. I don't know why they're anonymous. Actually, you should take credit for your wonderful questions. So Kent, maybe I'll put this one on you. You know, a very interesting one. When there are so many priorities we just talked about, right, and very little budget. So how do you prioritize money on where do you allocate what?
I think two words: impact assessment, right? Every dollar spent has to create impact. I think otherwise it's very hard for us to justify, be it a business case or even a value case. It's not always about cost savings, right? So certain things, I think one question that we have been talking about is how do we use technology to create new source of revenue or income? I think that's very critical, because you can skin yourself and cut everything so lean. until you lose muscles and lose the bones, you can't stand anymore, right? Or you just take the plunge and just invest in something, but obviously, like I said, impact assessment, invest in certain areas, take some bets, as long as your risk permits, right? Then you might not know, what sort of potential might come out of some of these new thinking, new ideas. So I think this is a time for us to take this volatility and convert that into some opportunity. Yeah.
Thanks, Ken. So maybe in the interest of time, I'll keep the next one as the last question. So, which says, how do you justify bringing third-party consultants to help in transformation? So many people seem to have liked it, which means a lot of them want to bring in, but probably are finding it tough to justify. Anything on that, Bill?
Okay, maybe I think the top question, take a step back, why do you need a consultant? I think most of us, we know that sometimes you need a consultant in because you want independent views. And even within IMDA, sometimes when we are working on our use cases or business cases, no matter how much you crunch the data and present to the stakeholders, they may not trust you. But the moment you bring the external consultant and say that this is the number from this consultant, okay, no questions asked. So I think we need to be, first, be very honest. Why do you want to bring the consultants? Is to bring the consultants to give you a view that then you can manage your stakeholders, or you need some special skills from the consultants. So when we first started our journey, actually, we went all the way to Europe to get the consultants because the e-invoicing world started there, and we need their expertise. So I think if you are very clear about your objective, and you know what value they bring to you internally, of course, externally, you can see how you can position them, then it's much easier for you to make a decision and make your case. So for us to bring our external consultant from Europe to help us to build our basic infrastructure and also the framework, it's a no-brainer to the stakeholders because they are the experts.
Thanks, Bill. And as moderator, I get to have the last word. And I'm also a third-party consultant. Okay. So I would say one of the ways, the trend that I'm seeing with a lot of our clients nowadays is just like you talked about. So I say, hey, do these steps and you can get 10 million of savings, right? Then you link the fees to that 10 million that the consultant says will be the savings, right? So make them walk the talk with you and take you through the journey and be, put skin in the game on that, right? That would be my take on that. I mean, if someone is bold enough to give a proposition, let them live by it and get paid by actually what comes out of that. So with that, thank you for a great panel. And Alan, I do hope we get the COE for this panel. With that, I'll just pass the mic back. Yeah, sure.
I just want to share this quote because I think this is something that is very, very real. More so, I just became a 6-month-old grandfather, right? This topic of ESG and sustainability, it used to mean to me like, okay, it's just one of those things that we do, recycling and all that, right? Until I came across this quotation, right, that says we did not inherit this earth from our ancestor, but rather we borrow it from our children. Right? And it really hits me because it makes me realize that we have to live this world in a better place for my children and my grandchildren than what we are. So I think this sustainability, ESG, is something that's very, very real for all of us. Yeah.
Thanks, David. In the spirit of still having the last word, let me add a quote to that. So I like this, which again I heard on similar terms, which says that we are only temporary guests on this planet. So don't spoil it. Let it remain the way for your next generation. Very much on the same lines. Once again, thank you very much, and thanks for being a patient audience.
Round of applause, please. Thank you very much.